becoming an elite athlete. So starting from the very beginning is consistency. You want to apply a consistent stimulus over and over and over again. Recover, stimulus, recover, stimulus, recover, stimulus, and not have these kind of interruptions in training that lead you to stop doing the thing that's going to get you where you want to get to. Do as much of the thing that you can recover from that gets you where you need to get to.
Welcome along to the Lifting in Life podcast. I'm Cam. I'm the host. I have a bachelor's degree in psychology. I'm a personal trainer and I also work in IT. Now, as you would have seen, today's episode is all about strength. And I have Rob Palmer on again. And he is a guy who is well accomplished in the realm of strength, specifically powerlifting, being the 10 times British champ, 2012 European champ, and also the current director of performance for British Powerlifting. Some of the key topics we go over in this episode is starting off with Rob's 3 pillars of performance model that he uses, and those are the pillars are strength, technique, and mobility, and we kind of deep dive into each of those and how you can improve in those areas and how they all sort of cross over and have an interplay there. Another interesting area was talking about muscle gain or hypertrophy, and it's kind of intuitive, you know, if your muscles are getting bigger, then you got more capacity to also get stronger. But more specifically, what Rob talks about is that you want to be growing the muscle fiber, not necessarily just having more muscle fibers, which I personally found quite interesting. And then another area, which I think you'll find quite valuable, is discussing training frequency and how often you should be training or performing these specific lifts like bench press, deadlift, squats in order to gain strength, but also factor in and optimize for recovery as well. As always, I appreciate you tuning into the podcast, and any support you can show goes a long way, and it also helps me continue getting these awesome people on. And remember, you make you. I like to have a little bit of chat before the podcast. It sounds like we're really relaxed, you know, coming into it. All right, let's start this off.
I'm so cold. I'm like shivering. Yeah.
I got the aircon on in here set to 19 degrees. It's quite nice, actually. All right. Anyway, Mr. Rob Palmer, we're back for another episode. I thought you were just so good looking and you spoke so well on our first episode that we should do another one.
I'm not sure about the lies to start with.
Yeah. I have to flatter the guests. That's my job.
yeah. I think as the years go by, less good looking, less knowledgeable.
You're like, can we just do an audio podcast this time? Maybe no video.
Yeah, you got a face for radio, mate.
yeah. No, here we are, man.
I appreciate you having me on again. It was good. I enjoyed the last one. It's brilliant.
Yeah, me too, man. Okay, so after some technical issues on my end, of course, we're back. Hopefully it's better than it was before. So far it seems better, right?
No, I think we're on to a winner now. 100%.
Okay. All right. Oh, don't jinx it. Touch wood. Anyway, here we are. Here's our strength episode. I'm not sure how much of the intro we captured, so maybe just as a brief introduction. Obviously, we did our episode that focused on powerlifting and also a bit of rugby towards the end, and it was just evident that you had this big wealth of knowledge that I wanted to learn more about, and I think people can learn a lot from you. So here we are again to do a strength-focused episode. So it's nice to have you on again, mate.
Yeah, thank you. I really appreciate being on. Thank you very much.
No worries at all. So where we started off last time, I asked you a question to the effect of what adaptations does the body have to undergo in order to gain strength? And I want to ask you a similar question so it kind of captures the broad essence of this episode. And the question is, what does it mean to get stronger, both physiologically, and I know that you discussed neural drive. So what does it mean physiologically and also neurologically to get stronger?
I thought about this a little bit more. You probably have to look at the definition of the term strength a bit more, because it isn't necessarily it's a term that, if you look at the pure definition of it, it's overcoming resistance or overcoming external resistance is essentially what force is, what strength is, sorry. So how much force can you exert to overcome external resistance or or for you to resist external forces.
Yeah. Yep. I
And
like that.
that's strength. If you were to look up all the sort of definitions of the word. So then you look at strength. Strength is an expression, isn't it? An expression of force, but you do that through the way you do that is through acquiring some sort of skill. So you use some sort of skill to express how much strength you have. So there is loads of across the spectrum. You could look at lots of different athletes and say he's strong, she's strong, they're strong, and the list goes on and on. But they're not all doing the same thing. They have They have a specific level of strength, which is all centered around their skill, if that makes sense. The skill, the execution, the task that they're trying to complete. They can express lots of force, i.e., strength, in that skill, and that's how we that's how we frame it, don't we? When we look at it, that's how we frame it. You know, it's not necessarily squat, bench press, deadlift, or Olympic lifts, or anything in particular. There's loads of ways to express it, and you can be bad at other things as well. But that's because your skill execution is probably very poor. Not that you're not strong. So it's all about
how applicable that strength is. Maybe it's like functional strength or something. How we
I think expression of strength is the best. Expression of force is the best way I can think of it, of sort of saying it.
No, that makes sense. And it's the expression of force.
Because lots of people are very strong.
Yeah, when applied to different movements, like you look at something like strongman, where they're picking up a rock off the ground and they're putting it on top of that, like tabletop or whatever. But then there's someone who's bench pressing, or someone who could, I don't know, Bulgarian split squat lots of weight or something. There's lots of different ways that you could express that strength.
And then you have to, and the reason you end up being elite at one or the other is because you spend lots of time practicing that thing.
And that's especially applicable if you look at something like the Olympic lifts, right? Like you might be able to deadlift 300 kgs, but that doesn't mean that you could even snatch 100 kgs.
Yeah, it doesn't. There's no direct correlation there at all to that, to those lifts. But then when you actually look, if you look at both skill sets in isolation, they are very different. A maximal deadlift, the motor pattern that you use to execute a maximal deadlift, is completely different to what you would need to be able to clean or snatch. That's more to do with the hip position and basically where you want the barbell to finish, and where you need to apply the maximum amount of force. With the deadlift, you're probably going to apply the maximum amount of force from the floor to just break it off the floor. The maximum amount of force the maximum amount of force you're going to express in the Olympic lifts is probably more around the hip, isn't it?
Yeah. You don't above your head.
Yeah. But they ultimately are all governed by how strong you are to a degree.
Yeah. No, I like that. Nice, man. So now that we've got that working definition of strength, from a physiological perspective, what is going on when we are getting stronger for that specific movement that we're wanting to get stronger in?
Again, going along the skill spectrum, you've got intra and intermuscular coordination. So you've got the coordination of the muscles as groups. So they work together to coordinate the movement. And then you've got the muscle in more of a smaller level, the isolated muscle, and how it can shorten and lengthen in a specific sequence. So those things need to happen. They're more neurological changes, which come. That's why you have to practice a certain amount. Otherwise, it would be, every elite sportsman would do the absolute bare minimum. And there is obviously there's conflicting camps, isn't there? The different camps that people sit in. You would have the sort of people who believe in you need to have this sort of relatively high volume approach, where you practice skill a lot with sort of a moderate to high intensity. And then you've got the other end, the sort of more, not only because people would know the sort of Dorian Yates kind of, blood and guts,
balls to the wall.
Yeah, and you basically do it's 1 to 2 sets to absolute failure. to stimulate growth. But obviously that then when you take him as an example, but obviously he was also renowned for being incredibly strong as well, because the intensity must have been through the roof in terms of the loads that he was using to go maximally for one set or two sets. So yeah, I mean, yeah, you have that kind of coordination, then you have the ability to recruit all of the fibres that you have, or the motor units, sorry. So that goes down to neural drive, which is, again, so you've got on the skill spectrum, you've got the movement, then the intermuscular coordination, so everything moves at the right time. Then you have neural drive, so you recruit everything that you can, then in the right order. And then you look at cross-sectional area. So, you know, basically if you've got a bigger engine, then you'll produce more force. You've just got more horsepower and you've got more to cool on. But that on its own is not enough. You can't just have big muscles. They're not necessarily going to produce the force because you haven't practiced the skill and you haven't given them the cue to basically for everything to work at the same time. So, you know, they're sort of the pillars, I guess, of strength. If you looked at like sort of physiological, neurological underpinnings for that.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. And it's kind of a good segue. I think the best way for us to deep dive into this is what you call your 3 pillars to performance, right? I feel like all of these ideas that we're touching on now are most likely encapsulated into this approach that you take to increasing your performance. So could you maybe describe just briefly what the 3 pillars of performance are, and then we could deep dive into each of them?
Are you referencing the sort of strength, mobility, technique kind of model? Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, so it's probably because they're all symbiotic. They don't I try not to view them in isolation, but they all basically feed each other. A bit like what we spoke about just a minute ago. So you have strength. So you have all the things within strength strength, mobility, and technique, and that's obviously referencing powerlifting. So but you could apply it to lots of other skills within sports. I wouldn't necessarily apply to sports because you can apply that framework probably to skills within sports that require those sort of physical capacities. So yeah, I mean, well, one, if we break down what each one is, and then the sort of the finer points of each one, and then obviously then it makes more sense how they link together. So if you look at strength first, like we spoke about, what strength is your ability to produce force, like we said, or resist force. So I actually quite like that, resisting force, because you think about squats especially, you know, the heavy barbell on your back, on the way down, you are resisting that external force, aren't you? You're not necessarily.
When you said resist force, I imagine the bottom of the squat. Like that is
absolute
resistance. Exactly.
And that's probably the best way I could describe. You know, people ask about the sort of equipped squatting, especially because it is super maximal. Obviously, put on the equipment, you've got a squat suit, knee wraps, etc., and it does become super maximal. But then, as a result, what does that feel like? I'm like, well, it feels like you're being squashed. Like literally, like you're literally getting compressed into this like little shape. and what
like you're the gravity just got turned up or something.
Yeah. Gravity definitely turns up a notch. But then your job as the biological organism, your job is to resist that force. So you have to hold a perfect position, a perfect shape. You can't let yourself sort of be manipulated by the weight. You are in control of the weight. Sorry, that's right. So we're talking about the strength, aren't we? So within that you've got the definition, obviously, what is strength. So we're trying to produce maximum amounts of force. So that's what strength is, and that's so within that, obviously, we spoke just a second ago, cross-sectional area. So then further on from that, how do you develop cross-sectional area?
And that means bigger muscles, right? For people who don't understand the term.
Bigger muscles. But bigger muscles. But if we break that down again, obviously got sarcoplasmic and myofibrillar hypertrophy. So you're looking for more myofibrillar, which is the size of each individual muscle fiber increases in size, as opposed to sarcoplasmic, which is not in a negative way. It's the more bodybuilding is the best way to describe it. So you get more sarcoplasmic, as in the muscle is bigger, but
Yeah.
it's not necessarily the muscle fiber that's got bigger. It's the cell, almost like the cell volume has increased. So the muscle is bigger, but the actual functional the functional force producing stuff within the muscle isn't there, or less of
So
it is
you
there.
want the cells to be bigger as opposed to having more cells.
The,
Obviously,
mu-
more bigger cells would
the
be the
yeah,
perfect.
it's the fiber, the muscle fiber you want to
Yeah.
get bigger, because then you've developed more cross sectional area. So you've basically got more,
Yeah.
and then you go down a step again. Obviously, then you're looking at sarcomeres and how many um, oh, in series. So you have sarcomeres in series, don't you? You have more sarcomeres in series. Change the pennation angle. So obviously the muscle gets bigger and pennation angle increases, so you can produce more force. Um, loads
Oh,
of
that's interesting.
small things, but they all come together in the end. So basically, basic fundamentals are you want a bigger muscle fiber, not just a bigger sort of cell volume, and that's where your
Mm.
rep ranges come in as to why would you pick one over the other. Why is it important to do probably more lower reps with a higher intensity than lower reps with sort of higher volume? Sorry, higher reps with a lower intensity. Sorry.
Hmm.
Does that make sense? Sorry.
Yeah. No, that makes sense, man. I've never um, like considered the difference or heard about the difference between increasing a fiber versus producing more fibers, and that produce and having bigger fibers or growing a fiber is more applicable to strength gain than having a larger number of fibers. Maybe seeing as we're here already, we won't forget about the three different areas, but we're here already, so I'd be interested to explore this a bit more. And you're discussing the different rep ranges there, so could we explore that a little bit further? And to put simply, how do we, if we're wanting to get strong, how do we increase a muscle fiber size as opposed to just creating more and more fibers?
So you fast twitch fibers are the fibers that hypertrophy.
Hmm.
So you need to target those. That's what you're trying to target, those fibers. But they're the ones that hypertrophy more readily. So you, you then require intensity for that, because you need to be able to recruit them. And then you're looking at Henneman's size principle. So you need to recruit as much as possible. So basically, on the size principle, you recruit the lowest threshold, the lowest threshold muscles first, and then you work your way up, don't you? As the intensity increases, you have to recruit more and more muscle fibers, but you also have to recruit more of the high threshold muscle fibers that produce the most force. And that's why you need there's a certain sweet spot, isn't there, for intensity. Once you go beyond that, which is obviously, this is just in text. It's not necessarily the truth when you apply it to the real world, but like 85% of your 1RM is a sufficient intensity to recruit fast twitch fibers.
Hmm.
So once you're up, but the other way you can recruit them is by going to close to fatigue.
Yeah.
So that's why when you look at the research now, you look at high rep, low rep, and there isn't actually there's a negligible difference between basically the hypertrophy you get from both high rep and low rep is roughly the same.
Hmm.
Because if you go close to failure, you do recruit your high threshold motor units to complete the task.
Hmm.
So the more fatigued you get, the more you have to call on more and more of the bigger, the higher threshold muscle fibers that you have to complete
Yep.
the rep range you want to get to. So it works in both ends. But what you lose is the sort of neural drive, the coordination, because you can do high rep work with horrific form,
Yep.
if you choose to. Not necessarily everyone does, but if you choose to, and you then aren't harnessing the skill
Mm.
of the lift.
Whereas
If
you
you
couldn't
look at
do
it from
a deadlift, say at 85% of your 1RM with horrific form, because you wouldn't even be able to lift it off the ground, most likely.
yeah, once you get to a certain level, you wouldn't be able to do 85% with poor form.
Hmm. Hmm.
But as a beginner, you probably can, and that's where you know. So a lot of people make that mistake, myself included. You lift, you get a bit caught up in your own hype, don't you? When you're younger, you think you're incredibly.
We've all been there.
Yeah, you think you're on this one way ticket. You keep going up
Just
and
a
up and up.
linear journey.
Yeah. It's only when you get hurt or you have you just get to that threshold, don't you? You either can't do it because your form is so poor, or you hurt yourself and you take a bit of a look at what you've been doing and you're like, oh, that's probably.
It's a nice reality check.
It shouldn't look like a question mark for my
or a dog taking a poop. That's the worst thing.
yeah. On all fours, no.
True. Yeah, hands on the ground. That's it.
Yeah. You're in trouble then.
Yeah.
But yeah, sorry. Going back to the main point of strength and the things you're trying to develop, they're all rabbit holes. All these things we're going to talk about are complete rabbit holes. You can keep going and going and going. But ultimately, you want to hypertrophy the right muscle fibers. Mm-hmm. And that's and you want to do that in specific areas. So when it comes to strength, and obviously you can do that by just doing the competition lifts or whatever the task is. But if you're talking about an athletic population, you then go down the more general route, because you can't, with some of their skill execution with an athlete, you can't replicate that. You can't replicate that in the gym and expect to get the strength gains that you're after, because obviously the movements are too complex. Mm-hmm. So you need to use more of a general guideline, as in we need the knee extensors and the hip extensors to be incredibly strong, and then you choose your sort of tool from your toolbox to do that, and it could be loads of different things. And then you just stick to the rules, which are you've got to lift probably somewhere around 80%. You've got to get relative. If you lift around 80%, and you're talking about hypertrophy, then you want to get close-ish to failure, as in the very final reps that you produce. The last couple of reps that you produce are slow, but they're not slow because you're trying to be slow. You're trying to be as fast as you can. They're slow because you're now getting more fatigued. When you get more fatigued, you're then recruiting the high threshold motor units, and you're getting that hypertrophic response in those. And that's when you're looking at rep ranges, aren't you? So it's probably like between 4 and 6 is probably for most sort of functional hypertrophy tasks would probably be okay. You could go slightly higher, but then by going higher, you reduce the intensity. You have to, because you wouldn't get the rep range. So if you want the intensity, if you want the sufficient intensity, you have to pick the correct rep range. And that sort of solves itself. By picking the correct rep range, you're sort of in the ballpark of the correct intensity.
Yeah, because if you took intensity to give it like a definition, your 1RM is absolute intensity. Yes. You could argue, right? So if you're going like at a 4 to 6 rep range, that's going to be high intensity, especially if those, like you say, those last 1 to 2 reps are very, very difficult and a lot slower moving than the previous 4 reps.
Yeah.
And what you're touching on there, to loop it back to the 3 pillars, in terms of the functional hypertrophy, what it made me think of is connecting it to the mobility pillar, whereby if you want to hypertrophy the right muscle groups, you have to be able to get into the right positions to target those groups, i.e., if I made that tangible, say like a squat, you would want bigger quads, but arguably you would want to hypertrophy your glutes more, let's say. And if you have poor mobility and you're always squatting through your toes, then it's going to be more in your quads than it is in your glutes. Am I kind of on the right track there?
Yeah. Well, yeah, definitely. Yeah. So the mobility is probably less in reference to the model. It's probably more in reference to mobility for skills, like you mentioned the squat, but not necessarily bodybuilding. Because I suppose with bodybuilding, you've got a whole range of your toolbox is probably arguably bigger to target the things you want to target, and you could argue that a sort of narrower squat, toes pointing forwards, more knees over toes is actually what you want from that exercise, and you choose something completely different for you choose a hip extension based exercise to target your glutes.
If we're talking about maximal strength output for a squat, would it be better to grow your glutes over growing your quads?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
especially when you talk about low bar. Again, going into different technical. This is where it all sort of links in together. You look at the mobility and how the technique is technique within sports. So sorry, the technical models within all sports are governed by the rule book, aren't they? But definitely within powerlifting.
Yeah,
so the rule book will govern the technical model that you need to adopt, and that then leads you to the mobility piece where you're like, right, okay, well, if I need to adopt this certain model, as in I've got to get my hip crease below my knee, as in the rule book, then you need to have sufficient mobility to achieve that position. But then you look at strength and expression of force, where you want to make sure that your mobility, because most people can achieve that. You can get your hip crease below your knee, but is it the most efficient way of getting your hip crease below your knee to then be able to express the correct amount of force? To then go back and then go, right, then because I can now express the right amount of force, I can work at the correct threshold to then develop the technique further. And then you just keep working.
You can really see how they interrelate there.
Yeah, but then you're sort of on a bit of a cycle. I don't think you ever, very rarely, I don't think you'll ever solve it. You're on this sort of never-ending cycle of change, and it becomes more and more as you go through your sort of stages of your in a lifting career. Sorry, you go through your stage in your lifting career. It becomes a little bit more subtle, and the things that you get out of each component become less. But then you're getting closer and closer to the top end of what humans can do within their respective weight classes. So there isn't, the amount you can tap from those is less and less because you're right at the top end.
Yeah,
but
diminishing returns.
Law of diminishing returns. Yeah. So, but as a sort of not a beginner intermediate, you can get loads out of, and you can make huge improvements by working on one. But it does lead you to the next thing, and then it leads you to the next thing.
If we zoom in on this mobility pillar a little bit more to make it tangible for people, if you did have someone who is in that beginner to intermediate category, what would mobility or improving mobility typically look like for those people? Obviously, it's going to be subjective to the individual, but what are some sort of broad brush mobility tips or techniques that you would give to that beginner to intermediate level?
So I think it's the understanding of what mobility is. So when you look at, so obviously the Kelly Starrett stuff was really popular, wasn't it? When CrossFit became popular, Kelly Starrett did the mobility WOD stuff, which is brilliant, and really opened people's eyes to a bit of self-help around how you can improve range of motion for specific lifts. So he obviously did a lot for the CrossFit. So there's a lot of Olympic lifting, a lot of squat pattern work. There was overhead press as well. But just really precise tools that you can use for key lifts. But what was missing from that probably was where it's gone to now, where all the buzzes around, you basically don't need to release, and so you need to do some sort of strength exercise, and that just solves all your mobility problems. Now, I think the truth, as always, is in the middle, in that it's horses for courses. It's if you walk into the gym and you can't move in the way that you want to move, then you probably need to do something more like the Kelly Starrett stuff, the supple leopard, band distractions, release work, because you want an acute response so you can train. What you need to bolt on top of that, or bolt onto that, is this low level of strength, exploring ranges of motion that you don't normally go into. Because if we look at power, and again, sorry, I keep referencing powerlifting, but it's pretty similar with a lot of other sports. Your sport might only require you to use a certain limited ranges of motion, or you're actually actively trying to limit the range of motion within the execution of the skill within the sport. But doing that on a long term probably isn't great for health of joints and the overall balance that you have as an athlete. Might be great in the short term for that lift or that skill that you're trying to master, because you're getting closer and closer to that sort of skill mastery and strength mastery. But you aren't going through full ranges of motion. You aren't taking certain joints to their outer ranges and making sure that you've got structural balance between muscles. The big prime movers are getting tons of attention. The small muscles that control joints are getting very little. And like most people, probably not the only. You don't just do powerlifting or just do the sport. You still live a life. You still want to go probably for a walk, and you probably want to, bend down to tie your shoelaces up. So you have to. Do have to. Daily life requires you to be able to move well. But that's the bit on the mobility piece. I think for a beginner / intermediate is not to sit yourself in one camp and say it's this or that, which is sort of the internet, isn't it? That's the internet right now. The sort of social media stuff is that you sit in one camp, not the other. This is good, that's not good, and vice versa, and bash the other one. My limited social media experience so far is that
this one post that I saw.
Yeah.
You hit the nail on the head. It's so true, man.
But don't be polarized. Use a bit of common sense. You want to be able to understand and use both methods. They're incredibly useful tools, both of them. But for most people, like I do bits of rehab exercise and within my programs, and obviously I've done it over the years. But the biggest thing, and this is more in not necessarily injuries, but the mobility piece. It's like nobody wants to be told that you can't do the thing that you want to do because you need to do this other thing that you need to do to be able to do the thing you want to do. You need to be able to do both at the same time. So you need tools that allow you to do the thing you want to do, which might be powerlifting, might be whatever sport, and allows you to do that with less pain, less restriction, greater skill execution. And you come away from that buzzing probably because you've had this great session and it's much better than what you intended it to be. But then you also need to respect the fact that you probably do the reason that is stiff and tight, that area or muscle group or joint is restricted or hyper. There's increased tone there. Is probably because certain smaller muscles within that joint complex aren't getting the attention they need and then become overactive. Mm-hmm. So they get overworked because they have literally zero capacity because you never work them on their own. And then they get overactive and the tone increases quite dramatically. And then you, as a result, that manifests itself as either abhorrent movement patterns or pain.
Yeah.
And you need, but that's why you need the low level strength work. You need to be able to get strong in isolation. You need to be able to learn, you need to learn how to release things to decrease tone acutely so you can do the thing you want to do. And then you need to learn the exercises and that's where functional anatomy comes in. You can only do that if you actually understand functional anatomy and what the role is of every individual muscle through your entire body. Mm-hmm. Maybe not your entire body, but like how it relates to
ones.
And again, going back to the technique piece, you have to understand the skill. Mm-hmm. So if you understand the skill and you understand the biomechanics of what you're asking yourself to do, planes of motion, joint ranges, what they should do, like joint mechanics, then you can apply the right tool when it comes to mobility because you know what you need to go after to achieve the movement that you don't have.
Mm-hmm. And so I like how you're putting it into two different ideas here where it's like an acute release, which might be like the banded stuff that you're discussing, but then there's the like long-term and mobility. Its working definition is strength at end range. Would that be right?
Oh God, I don't know. I'd never actually.
I think that's right.
Looked at what mobility is.
I think that's the difference between flexibility and mobility. Where mobility, like flexibility, is the range, but mobility is having the strength at that end range, which makes sense. So when you're talking about those small muscles, like at that end range. But anyway, so it's like an acute release and then a mobility, so a strength gain at that end range. To put it into practice, could you go over a few different examples of the two, just so people who don't intuitively know what those two different things look like could have a working understanding?
Yeah, so I saw someone yesterday. So she had two issues. One was sort of a low back issue, and then the other one was a shoulder issue. So we looked at the shoulder. So this is where the whole thing sort of comes together, and you see it because I would do within the assessments there. You'd look at joint range of motion, isolated strength, and then a technical piece on how that all manifests itself technically.
Yep.
And then what's actually happening. And then if you get all three, you know that there's actually something you need to really highlight as being a problem area. You need to go after that. So in terms of the shoulder, so bench press, common, obviously one of the three disciplines within powerlifting, common exercise most people do. I don't think people really understand the role of the rotator cuff within bench press. And what, if you look at the ideal form within the bench press, you've got shoulder retraction, depression. Mm-hmm. Then you go through your sort of shoulder, the humerus. You go through extension, but then you're also going through internal rotation. As you get closer to the chest, you have to internally rotate your shoulder.
Yeah.
So
interesting.
If you lose internal rotation, you'll feel like you have no power. Well, one of two things will happen. One, you'll come down, you'll hitch your shoulder here because you don't have internal rotation, and then to keep your elbow out where you want it to be, you have to then hitch the shoulder to be able to do that because you don't have internal rotation at the glenohumeral joint. Or you hold that position and you tuck in.
Oh man, that's so interesting. I feel like that's so applicable to me. I'm just thinking about my bench press.
Everyone always thinks about their own.
Bench press. Yeah. It's always been my weakest movement out of those three. Not that I'm like super strong, but it's definitely been by far the weakest. So for me to think about mine, that's so applicable.
Well, send me some videos of you benching. I'll tell you what's going on.
I actually might next time I bench.
No, you should. Yeah, take it from so film it from the top.
Yeah.
As in your head's like there and they're filming from here, and you can see everything that's going on at the shoulder and elbow. Yeah. So you've got that, but then you look at okay, what's going on then? Is it? And then you look and you're like, well, they don't have you passively. Then they all have limited internal rotation. So you get them lying on the bed, take them into internal rotation. They have limited internal rotation. Then you do some sort of isolated cuff assessment. So you look at cuff strength in isolation. Then you find that their sort of infraspin teres minor, has poor capacity, poor strength, and probably has poor recruitment as well. The subjective thing that they always report back is that I feel like I go to move and there's like a delay between that me wanting it to happen and it happening. Mm-hmm. And then that happens. Then you've got so what caused? It's chicken and egg. What caused what? Was there something there that caused the muscle weakness that then caused the tightness caused the muscle weakness because you're not able to get into those ranges? Or is it the weakness caused the tightness? It doesn't really matter in the end because the intervention is the same. Mm-hmm. If you want to continue bench pressing, you're going to have to find more range in internal rotation. If you want it to be a really well executed lift, you're going to have to find more range in internal rotation. So you have to find a way to release through that sort of posterior cuff so you can then get more internal rotation. But then you also need to make sure, because you've also highlighted that you have poor strength, that you actually isolate it and you make it strong.
Yeah.
And then you'll find that, you'll find that your technical ability goes up because your mobility has gone up. And because your mobility and technical ability have gone up, you can then express your strength without actually so it's getting stronger without getting stronger.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because strength is an expression of force. It's not just doing. So this is my only bugbear. Not my only bugbear, actually. That's a lie.
Your only one.
Not my only one. One of my bugbears is this kind of. I think that training athletes and strength power athletes is a not a fine art. That sounds a bit stupid, but like it's very nuanced. And if you think of it in terms of force expression, so how can you express force? Then you move away from this model of more. So I need to go through the same linear-ish periodization. I just need that program that I did here, where I did 10, 8, 6, 4, 2, whatever. Then I did a 1RM. I'll just do that again. And I'll just keep doing that forevermore and my capacity will will improve every single time. I'm like, that is just a muscular capacity model, and there's no thought going into how you can express all of that force. Obviously, I have no issue with certain rep schemes and whatever else. I probably have a bit of an issue when I see people do squats with sets of 10.
Yeah.
Because I just don't, for a powerlifter, I just,
Yeah. That's like endurance training.
I don't know, I'll have to get my inhaler out for that one.
Yeah. Increasing your VO2 max, I reckon, if you're
Yeah,
doing that.
I'm not a huge fan of it, but it doesn't fit because it doesn't fit within my sort of paradigm. My model of what I think allows you to increase maximal strength.
Yep.
Now, not to say it is in there. Like you will improve maximal strength by doing things like that. I'm sure you will. It doesn't fit within my paradigm, my model. I wouldn't go near it because I would look at other things. But yeah, it's the mobility thing is basically that, isn't it? Can you decrease tone to execute your skill, and then can you work on your low level motor, neuromuscular control, strength, capacity within these really small muscles that play a huge role in the overall execution of the skill.
Yeah. And I like that you're making it directly tangible to getting stronger too. It's not just like do some mobility training because it's good for you. It's like if you do this,
Yeah.
like it is good for you, obviously, but it's applicable to your sport. And I'm sure everyone, at least people who are listening to this, want to get stronger. So if you include mobility training, then you will also get stronger. It's not just so you can do a pistol squat or something.
Yeah. It's not. Well, that's why I think. Like, again, my limited experience of the online social media world is again, it's just that polarized approach to stuff. You see people who talk about mobility look like they don't strength train.
Yeah.
No disrespect to them.
Yeah.
But then on the strength training side, you see lots of people who do the pure strength training look like they can't move.
Can't get into a squat unless there's 100 kgs on the barbell.
Yeah, and use the weight to get me in.
Yeah, exactly.
It's a good approach.
Yeah. It'll force me into the position.
But that's and that's again, it's just my thoughts on that subject. But I don't like the idea of moving people away from the things that they, especially when it comes to a lot of the people within power. There's a lot of really elite lifters in this country in powerlifting, and it's like if you I can't remember my point there. I was going to make a really good point. I'm sure of it.
Oh man, it was intense. You're building up to it too.
I was, but there is some really talented lifters, and they're really strong. It's just I can't. No, it's gone. It's gone. It's completely gone.
They could be really stronger if they did more mobility training. Maybe.
Yeah, it's more that approach to mobility, like you said. It's not mobility for mobility's sake.
Yeah,
it's directed, hyper focused, directed mobility based on the technical skills required for the sport.
And I could imagine that like it's easy to put the intensity and the time into lifting heavy weights, and that feels like work, like you're working towards your goal. But it's almost like that same intensity and focus should also be applied to the mobility stuff too. Even though you're not lifting a heavy weight, it's going to help you lift that heavy weight because you're going to get into the positions better or whatever.
Exactly, yeah. And then you think about it, it's just a paradigm shift in terms of what you're not thinking about. You're thinking about your expression of all the strength that you have.
Yeah.
How you can express that in the best way possible. And if you think of it like that, then you do put a lot more stock in sort of mobility, flexibility, and also like the technique. It's not just like more intensity, get more up for it. So it's try and be a little bit more subtle with the approach.
Yeah, be a bit smarter with it.
Well, it's just training smart, because ultimately you're gonna tap that source pretty quickly. There's only so much you can do in terms of a muscular capacity model. Just get more capacity, just get more up for it, just do more, maybe add another session in. I've got another bugbear actually.
Oh yeah. What is it?
The frequency that people train at.
I've heard, we still need to touch on your third pillar. We'll get to that soon. And I've heard that when it comes to something like frequency with strength, that higher frequency is better than lower frequency, i.e. obviously not more the better, but if you were squatting, say 2 to 3 times a week, that's better for strength gain than once per week. What's your bugbear?
It's
Let's go.
the route that people take to get there. So if for you to get stronger, you have to, and you're a beginner or relatively new to strength training, definitely to in a competitive sense as well.
Yeah.
Then your first port of call shouldn't be, oh, it says that you have to squat 3 to 4 times a week, so I'm going to squat 4 times a week because that's going to make me stronger. It's like, you don't squat.
Yeah.
Maybe start with squatting once every 7 days and tap that out. And then if that stops working, move to 2 times a week. And when that stops working, maybe move to 3 times a week. But then you're looking at this kind of like more model, aren't you? And you're not maybe not addressing some of the other factors that could just give you could give you the gains that you're after. You wouldn't have to do more training. You do less training.
And it's like using the tool when the tool is required, not just using it because it could be a good tool.
Yeah. So I've got plenty of people who, their shoulders are really sore. They have issues with their bench press. And how many times you bench? 4 times a week. 4 times a week.
Shit.
When did you move
That's
from?
a lot.
Yeah, I'm like, how did you get there? Like, how did you get to 4? Oh, it's just what other people are doing. I'm like, well, are they any good at benching? But there's one guy, there's some fantastic, Owen Hubbard. I was actually shocked when he first told me. He said, he benches like 4 or 5 times a week. And I was like, oh my God, it's insane.
Man.
But then, so the science behind all of that would be, there's a really good paper on Nordic hamstring curls, so eccentric hamstring training. So they looked at different sets and rep schemes over a week, and then obviously multiple weeks, and the group that increased their strength the most were the group that did 1 set a day of like 2 reps or 3 reps or something. So they did high frequency, low volume, but obviously it's Nordic, so you actually say it's super maximal, so really high intensity.
Yeah.
So that's the only way it really works. If you reduce the volume, so you can increase frequency. You're then splitting the volume, and all that allows you to do is train with greater average intensity over the week. But it's one of those things. What's your recovery cycle? How much work are you doing? What can you actually recover from? There's certain, and again, this goes another step back, is how do you plan your entire year of training?
Yeah.
That's not a year round. That's not a year round approach.
No, not at all. It's not sustainable.
No, it's too high frequency. There's not enough, because you're doing this super highly specific work. So you're basically going to do bench press and variations of bench press. You're not going to do accessories. There's no room for accessories in. There's no room for like doing, so then you're missing out on that part where you're like, well, okay, how do we, if we're going after functional hypertrophy for a certain muscle group, because that's what we've decided is needed for you to take the next step, you actually need more mass.
Yeah.
Certain muscle groups need more, they need to be stronger. So the first port of call is to actually make them bigger, increase the fiber size, and then we'll look at, the skill and the neural drive and all the rest of it. You're not going to do that doing 4 times a week. You never recover.
No. No, not if you're pushing it to the right intensity that you need to be in order to.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you take from different areas and again, like a yearly approach to training, not just like this is the program. And this is the program I'm going to do.
What season are you in, or what like periodizing your year?
Yeah.
Pick the season. No, I like that. It also reminds me of when I did my bodybuilding shows a few years ago. I really wanted to bring up my legs, and I asked my coach. I was like, "Oh, so should I be doing 2 leg days a week?" And he said, "Let's get 1 leg day right first."
Exactly.
And
yeah.
It's just like it's just stuck with me ever since. And when I was training my clients and stuff, like I'd have the same question. It's like, well, you can't even do this one really well yet, and you're taking 3 or 4 days to recover from it. So let's just focus on doing this one right. And then, like you said, when it stops working, let's employ this. You could maybe put that in a dieting sense too. Yep, doing 7 days of cardio and being on 1,000 calories would probably get you shredded. but you don't need to do that now. You could drop your calories back by 300 and do
Yeah.
2 cardio days a week, and that
Yeah.
would work for
Yeah.
now.
Yeah. Especially if you haven't,
Yeah.
like you say, if you haven't dropped your calories and you haven't done any cardio,
Yeah.
well, you already added,
You have like this whole tool bag full of things that you can employ
yeah,
at a sequential order
yeah,
instead of chucking all the tools at it first.
yeah, definitely, yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah,
I
that
like that.
that whole thing of training frequency and sort of year long planning is
Yeah.
I can't remember how I got on that topic now. Sorry.
No, that's good. I don't know if I can either, to be honest. We were, yeah. Anyway,
Yeah,
coming back, what
great
I was gonna,
segue.
what I was gonna do now anyway was pull it back to the third component of the performance model. So we had strength, and we've talked about mobility. So what's our third one?
Technique.
Mm-hmm.
So technique is the skill, isn't it? And then I suppose it's the interplay now between that and the other two. You can't. We know our again, powerlifting as the lens through which we'll view it. We know what's required of us because there's a rule book and it states exactly what you're supposed to do. So you know what the rules are, and then you just try and bend those as much as you can. So that's where technique comes in. You're trying to make the lift as efficient as possible within the rules.
Yep.
So that's a sort of a one-liner for technique. There's also that element of what is technique anyway, and skill acquisition. So that's where I think strength and technique interplay with each other is using. So sort of more Russian kind of Olympic lifting models would use this kind of 80%, isn't it? Most of the lifts are done at 80%. You do multiple sets of 2, 3 at 80%. You then step load and you do more work. You increase the poundage at 80%, and then this really long sort of approach to how you get good at those lifts. But the 80% is enough to challenge. Obviously, you get decent motor unit recruitment, but you also are challenging getting enough work in to develop a skill execution at the right intensity. So with powerlifting, it's slightly different because you're not going to do the volume like that within a single session. It's less complex as a skill. But then I think you do need the intensity. So doing work at like 50% and say I'm working on technique. So you're developing a motor pattern, but the intensity is far too low for you to get transfer because you're looking at what muscles are actually being recruited and how are they being sequenced to how much tension you're having to create, because that's where the skill comes in. The technical skills of lifting are about how much tension you can create within the framework of the rules. So yeah, I look at that and I look at this sort of like constraints based approach. So obviously people use bands and bands, chains, pauses, and still they think of it on the strength spectrum. I think of it on the skill acquisition spectrum. Yep. So if you're using what do chains and bands actually do? They actually make you hyper focus on the skill and the execution of certain aspects of the skill. Again, just changing the sort of paradigm slightly on what you, and everyone thinks and there is a huge element of this in terms of like the physiological benefits in terms of strength are enormous with bands, chains, all these kind of compensatory acceleration things. But if you then look at it as a skill in itself, it's like, you're trying to challenge the skill of lifting, and you're trying to create this kind of fairly chaotic environment that you have to execute the skill perfectly in.
At every stage of it too, because it's an applicable force to every stage of it. It doesn't get easier when you get stronger. Yeah.
So you're using things like that within that sort of technical framework. So what can you use? Think of technique outside of this sort of like, well, perfect technique is me doing everything really light and then showing you I can do it really light and really well. It's actually like do stuff very heavy that really challenges the skill, and it's sometimes not going to look particularly pretty, but the transfer you get to skill execution is far greater.
An analogy that a tutor described it to me as, like, when you think about technique of a movement, is like walking through a grassy field. A long grassy field, the more times you walk the same path, the more cemented that path is going to be. So that's your
Yeah.
technique execution. But how it's kind of almost reframing it a little bit for me, where you're saying just because you're doing it light doesn't mean it's just a technique focus. You actually need to be doing the heavier stuff well. And it's almost like how it's reframing it for me is not just your body walking that path. It's like what muscle fibers and what percentage of recruitment is walking that same path as
Yeah.
well. Just
Yeah.
because you can do a barbell squat with great form, I don't know if that necessarily carries over to having 200 kgs on your back, because then it's actually a whole new set of muscle fibers that are performing the movement. Yeah, your same joints are doing movement,
Yeah.
but you're actually recruiting a lot more stuff in order to do that
Yeah.
exercise as well.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly what it is. I think of it. How do I think of it? It's oh, come on, Robert.
Come on, Robert.
So yeah, like you say, when you walk in the same path, but it's and it is the same. It's just a slightly jagged path, if that makes
Yeah,
sense.
yeah,
Actually,
yeah.
purposefully, yeah. Think of it like a bit like a bandwidth, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
You're making the bandwidth bigger, so the
Yeah.
path is actually getting wider
Mm-hmm.
because you've added more. With the field analogy, you've still
Yeah.
got all the stuff on the fringes, which is like long grass, but you've actually, by moving laterally ever so slightly, you've just made a much bigger path, which gives you more scope when things don't go. And it's more to do with when things aren't perfect.
Yeah.
So when you don't execute the perfect lift, you've got skill capacity to do it and it not be perfect, and you can still complete it. And you can,
Yeah.
like my experience is only my experience with it. So my experience with using bands and chains and other things is that when lifts have got near maximal or truly maximal, and you get thrown out, because then that's what then the muscle weakness gets highlighted, as in more the global stuff, like do you have weak knee extensors versus hip extensors, and then you because you're right at threshold, they then get highlighted massively and the technique shifts. But by having these subtle differences within your program with the chains, bands, they're just examples, but things like that really challenge the skill at a higher percentage, you then have more bandwidth to execute the skill that you want to obviously then, think of it as the force thing again. You can express the force in this slightly non-perfect way and complete the lift. But there's also the skill transfer aspect of it as well. So when you look at I think it's like Bondarchuk's model of so where exercises fit in a continuum, basically. So where you get the greatest transfer.
Yeah.
There has to be there isn't. I don't think there's necessarily any science, but there has to be a threshold for. I think every coach and athlete should probably have a threshold for their accessory work, which gives you transfer. So if you do some sort of, you would class it as like special developmental exercise, which again is on the strength spectrum. It's also on the technique spectrum as well. But I think if you're doing anything less than 70% for those exercises, then you're not getting the desired transfer to the main lift.
Yeah, I remember you mentioned this last time, and I like that you brought it up again because I wanted to explore this a bit further. So to make that tangible, like we did in the last episode, say a dumbbell press, you could easily do 70% of your bench press max, let's say. So that would be transferable. Is it because it is recruiting the same or a similar amount of muscle fibers as the bench press would?
Yeah, I think it's intensive enough to have all the sort of key components in place where you have to create enough tension, you have to apply enough force, you because of the variant that you're using. Obviously, you use dumbbell press. I think of it more along the lines of like the competition lift, but then done with some sort of constraint. So the pauses, multiple pauses.
Right. Okay. So it doesn't have to be a whole different exercise,
No, not
but it could be the
necessarily.
exercise performed differently. Like an example that I've been seeing you do lately, which look really hard, is the pin squats.
Oh
Where
yeah,
you're pressing the those look tough, man. But would that be another example where you're pushing the barbell off pins that are, what would you say, maybe halfway down in your squat?
yeah. It's probably about half. Yeah, it's probably about a half squat. If I'm being generous to myself as a half squat.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's more that I'm trying to overload the top half of the lift, because when you get in the kit, you obviously get a big kick out the bottom, and you have to transition then from when it gets slow and when it gets really tough is when you've kicked out the bottom. You have to transition into it's more me than the suit and wraps.
So all that elastic potential is then
It dissipates
thrusted onto you.
And that's again, you're talking about what happens when you get to truly maximal weights. And then that's where you get the transfer. Obviously, that's for me is it's like super maximal, but then it's partial range. So it's again, there's a bit of nuance to all that sort of stuff.
Like a rack pull deadlift or something like that.
Yeah.
While we're here, another model that I'd be interested to touch on with you is the whole idea of speed versus accuracy. And I understand it as you could almost maybe swap out speed for weight here, maybe weight versus accuracy. And this is maybe more applicable to beginners, but how would that apply to people that you train? So obviously, to briefly explain it, you can be more accurate when you're going slower or when you're using less weight. And if you try to do something faster or with more weight, the accuracy is going to decrease. So how would that apply to you training people? Because you're touching on here how if you're lifting heavier weights, it's increasing your scope. But if you were earlier on in your journey, would you argue that having more accuracy is better or more applicable to that skill acquisition?
Yeah, because speed comes later.
Yeah.
In the journey, as you're in your sort of strength journey, doing dynamic work comes later. Because I think there's a bit of again, totally anecdotal, but I do think there's a bit of a threshold. If your maximal bench press as a man is like 100 kilos, and you're going to do dynamic work where you're saying, right, I'm working on speed strength or strength speed. I can't remember the exact sort of term.
Speed versus accuracy, it's speed versus accuracy, but I feel like you could interchange, like swap out speed for strength.
Yeah. But then you're working on that kind of physical capacity where you're trying to move weights as fast as possible, but you're technically not sound enough. Oh, sorry. Your maximum is 100 kilos. So then you're trying to move stuff like, say you're choosing 50% is what I'm going to use. It's dynamic effort method. That's kind of 50 to 60%. That's 50 kilos. Are you getting the physiological benefits you need from a 50 kilo dynamic bench press? It only really works when you're up nearer the top end of your physical potential, because then those weights are, in an absolute sense, are heavy enough. And also you've probably got technical proficiency enough to do it on both sides. As a beginner, I wouldn't necessarily use. I don't think that would avoid it completely though, because they are good. They're really good things to Does it recruit high threshold motor units? Yes. Does it improve sort of general athleticism? Yes. Does it improve power? Yes. So you would want to use it. You probably just won't want to use the competition lift as your.
And it kind of reminds me of what you were saying before, like about the toolkit thing. It's almost like get good at performing the movement first before you try and make it too fancy or overcomplicate it.
Yeah. So it's improve your technical proficiency and then move on to more dynamic work. But that's within the context of the lift itself. If you're talking about athletes, loads of athletes wouldn't necessarily bench press 100 kilos. Would do like power movements, dynamic movements, because that obviously is what they need for sport performance. They wouldn't necessarily have that kind of same, wouldn't work off the same rules as to why you would do one, not the other. But then their toolbox is much greater. They could throw things. They could do like clap push-ups or something, But anyone can do it. Actually, in fairness, anybody could do it. It just depends what you think is going to give you the biggest bang for your buck for the thing that you're trying to develop. So if power is the physical capacity that is going to be the differentiator between you being successful and not successful in your sport, then you need to have more power-based movements earlier on in the process, underpinned by strength. So strength underpins all of it all the time. But you can probably start earlier. I'd say if you're a competitive powerlifter, you probably wouldn't do that until you're actually appreciably strong. and then you would add in your sort of dynamic stuff a bit later.
Mm.
Because your
Yep.
goal is to be maximally strong, and then you're trying to round off your sort of strength set, as in you've made yourself. What's the thing that's going to drive your maximal strength up a little bit more? Is it sort of improvements in rate of force development because you're actually a slow lifter?
Yeah.
Then improvements in RFD will you could argue they would help you because you don't naturally have that as a lifter. But if you lift heavy, really maximal weights, but you lift them ridiculously fast, then you probably need more work that's like heavier and potentially slower
Yeah.
to get you where you need to get to. You definitely won't get much bang for your buck from doing dynamic work because you sort of do that through your whole warm up series.
Yeah. It's
You
in
move
there.
fast, move fast, move fast, move fast, and then get to a heavyweight, which is still incredibly fast for that intensity, but it is your max. So what's going to take you the next that tip you over to the next rung where you do a bit more? Not going to be more speed because you've got it naturally.
Yeah. It's that tool analogy again, bringing
Yeah,
in the tool that you need to.
yeah.
Now, maybe stepping away from the physical, actually lifting weights, and maybe into some more holistic kind of stuff. Where does the external variables of like sleep and stress and nutrition factor into strength gain, and what does that look like in practice?
Well, hugely important to be rounded, isn't it?
Yeah.
You need to recover. Sleep is literally the cornerstone of recovery is sleep. There's no other way to get around that. You can't. All the other recovery methods that you have involve you probably doing something physical.
Yeah. True.
Not many are there where you're like, oh, I don't. There's no. Sleep is amazing. So if you can prioritize sleep, and it's probably sleep in terms of not hour. I wouldn't even say hours necessarily. Obviously, hours gets the big sort of like you've got to do 8 to 10 hours. It's like 8 to 10 hours. I haven't slept 8 to 10 hours for about 2 decades. Like,
Yes. Yeah.
still alive.
Yeah.
It's I think it's quality, sleep quality, and onset of sleep. So you're better off having 10 hours of sort of restless sleep, or 6 to 7 hours of what you consider to be really high quality sleep, where you felt that you slept really deeply. I would take the latter every time.
Yep.
I'd take the deep,
Yeah.
higher quality sleep. If you can get both, I think 10 hours is such a long time to be in bed.
That's an amazingly long time. Yeah. Since I got my Garmin, it gives me a nice little morning report
Yeah.
every morning with like my sleep score and duration, and it's generally around that 7-hour mark. And I find that's like for me at least, it allows me to still get up early, but I still feel recovered. So I can resonate with what you're saying there. It's like it's not feasible for everyone to get 8 to 10 hours of sleep a night and also achieve all the stuff that they want to.
Yeah.
But if they can make sure their sleep environment is set up well, like it's dark and it's cold and
Well,
all
you
that
sort
kind
of want to
stuff.
get into bed and fall asleep relatively quickly, don't you? And that means you have to do. You basically have to be relatively disciplined to not do the things that keep you up and keep you wired. So looking at your phone is a big no-no. Caffeine, big no-no. Probably eating too close to bedtime, bit of a no-no. So there's things you can do to improve it, like blackout curtains would improve it. Well, supposedly a warm bath, because then you feel cooler. So the temperature is important in the room, so you sleep well. Small things like that, but that sleep quality over duration. So yeah, into this sort of holistic approach, the nutrition. Then after that, what do you eat? When do you eat? I've dealt with so many athletes who, oh, I'm not really a breakfast person. It's like, well, what's your goal? Like, if your goal is to be, you tell me, because if it's not to be performing very, very well athletically, and you're talking about physiology mainly, not necessarily, because, I wouldn't say breakfast is, critical to you thinking clearly for a lot of people, but definitely would be up there for, you haven't eaten for 8 hours, well, probably longer, 10 to 12 hours, you probably haven't eaten for. So you need to be supporting recovery through your nutrition, which means probably missing breakfast and then eating at midday. I just don't feel hungry in the morning. So, well, what?
Yeah, and especially if you're thinking about like protein intake throughout the day, I feel like that's a big one when it comes to nutrition. If you, again, skipping breakfast, like health wise, can actually have a lot of benefits. But if you're thinking about recovery, getting in your enough protein throughout the day at staggered intervals, skipping breakfast can really delay that or make it difficult to get it all in.
Yeah,
right?
and the bigger you are, the harder it is with that protein target, because you can only ingest so much at one time. I'm sure there is some variance on this, but general rule of thumb stuff. I know there's a new study out that obviously stated 100 grams you could actually utilize 100 grams in one sitting of protein.
That's a lot. Because
but then
prior to that, it's what maximum, was it 60 or 50?
Yeah, 60, 70 is what I believe to be the right number. But then after that, very, very little benefits. But then if you are, if you were a big man, like, or woman, sorry, then, you miss breakfast and start eating at lunchtime, you're not going to make it.
Not unless you're staying up till midnight.
Yeah. So that kind of 2 point, and I'd say that's one big thing that I've seen over my entire career is this kind of asking people to hit a protein target and get to 2.2 grams per kg. Yeah. And not necessarily that it has to be 2.2 grams. Obviously, there's a bandwidth, isn't there? But let's go for the upper limit, because why would you go for the lower? Why would you go for the lower one? 2.2 grams per kg of body mass, and then every single day. Try and hit it every single day, and you. I doubt there's many people who do, outside of actually physique athletes.
And especially, I heard this on another podcast, especially in the weekends.
Yes.
Like you sleep in the weekend, maybe, let's go out for a coffee. Then all of a sudden it's 11 a.m., 11:30, and you probably didn't prep your meals yet. You didn't eat. You don't have a meal prepped. So you just grab maybe a meal deal over here in the UK. That's fun. But there's like 10 grams of protein in it or something.
Is that not a global phenomenon, the meal deal?
Nah, it's not, man. We were amazed. We had so many of those when we first came over, when we were like looking for places to live in Manchester, like on the go, grab a meal deal.
Yeah.
But and what was it percentage wise? It was something like, if you only did it 5 days a week, that's like 65%, which is like a C+ or something like that. And you can't expect to be like performing like an A+ athlete or being as strong or as big as you want to be if you're missing out 2 out of 7 days.
And they're like, they're probably a bit bigger than 1%ers. They're just the small things that make up the whole, because you can't deny that the actual stimulus is the main thing, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly.
Stimulus that you need to achieve the thing. You need to practice.
You can't eat all the protein and
not
to get stronger.
Haven't trained for 3 weeks.
I'm not getting stronger.
Yeah, too busy eating, wasn't I? So sleep, nutrition. Obviously, we just spoke about protein. I just think it's the one that people miss the most. Everyone gets caught up on sort of micronutrient, I need to be healthy. There needs to be more vegetables and green shakes and all the rest of it. It's like, it does. Don't get me wrong. But like, there is also, like, you'll probably hit the upper limit of those relatively quickly if you have if you eat, and I'm no nutritionist. There'll probably be someone on there who's, what's he saying? Like, try and have the sort of decent amount of fruit and vegetables a day. Take a multivitamin. But the protein, you'll be able to do most of the fruit and veg and multivitamin. You can do that. Most people can do that daily. I don't think there's many people who don't eat vegetables or fruit.
Yeah.
Or have a multivitamin is obviously a bit of a cheat, but then the protein one actually takes a lot of effort.
Yeah. Effort, preparation, like planning in advance, all that kind of stuff. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And I was going to say on the supplementation kind of vein, I would be interested to pick your brain on sups for a little bit in a second, but it's kind of like an iceberg, right? Like the supplements, it's in the word, they supplement the diet. I view them as this like tiny thing on top, whereas if you don't have this like this base or this foundation set of eating whole foods, eating regular meals, all of that kind of stuff, doesn't matter if you're taking your athletic greens or your vitamin or whatever, it might help a little bit, but it's not going to help as much as having a really good foundation of whole foods in your diet.
Yeah. Well, you could argue with the green shakes and stuff like that, are you even your gastric emptying is going to be much faster with the liquid. So you're not even getting what you think you're getting out of that.
Yeah,
because you're literally going through so quickly.
Yeah.
Anyway,
what does a typical day of eating and supplementation look like for you?
For me,
yeah.
Well, I've got children, so like two turkey dinosaurs in there. No,
fish fingers,
yeah, fish fingers,
chicken
beans.
nuggets,
yeah, all leftovers. None of it's cooked for me.
Yeah,
No,
dropped on the floor.
I would, I'd probably start with a shake because obviously I want to get into work. So there's a protein shake, sort of, was it 40, 50 grams, and then lunchtime is some sort of protein plus salad and like rice or something. But a small amount of carbs, though, not a huge amount of carbohydrates in my diet generally. I eat an enormous amount of protein bars, just purely for convenience.
Nice.
yeah. But that's again the more the protein target thing. I do get sort of hunger pangs. I'm not like desperate for food. But I'm like, I want to get something in. I'm trying to work, so just have a couple of protein bars, and then dinner, which would be whatever sort of having as a family meal, and then after that, I'm quite religious with this cottage cheese and sort of cashew nuts mixed together every night.
Cottage cheese and cashew nuts mixed together.
Yep.
Cottage cheese and cashews. Wow, that's a new one, man. I thought you were going to say cottage cheese on like rice cakes or something.
Well, after this, wait till this episode goes out there, man, and then there'll be some sort of shortage in the UK. Cashew nuts and cottage cheese.
Yeah. Where's it gone?
It's it's not for everyone. I'm not going to lie, but I enjoy. Well, what do I like about it? Not a lot. I try and avoid the sort of protein yogurts.
Mm-hmm.
And they are good, but it's more like that. I quite like having something that isn't sort of flavoured, if that makes sense.
Yeah,
and it's a bit bland.
Yeah.
It just makes me feel like I'm being disciplined.
Yeah, yeah. I'm an athlete.
This
doesn't taste that great.
Yeah.
I must be an athlete.
Yeah, I chew a raw broccoli after that as well.
Yeah.
But try and get some sort of veg in with the sort of midday meal and the evening meal, fruit and veg, and then I do have fruit around the cottage cheese as well.
Yeah, interesting. And what subs do you typically take? Like a multivitamin, like you mentioned?
Yeah, a multivitamin, a creatine, but not powder. I take tabs.
Oh yeah,
which is again just one of those things I can't. I want to take it at night time. I don't really like taking because I have the shake in the morning. So I've sort of had like 500 mils and then I'll have like a normal drink. But I don't really like the thought of just having another sort of pint of water with some sort of grainy powder mixed into it. So
why don't you check the creatine powder in your protein shake?
Again, it's grainy. I don't like the sort of like weird grainy texture to it. But and I feel like it gets left at the bottom as well.
Yeah.
The tabs I like because I just can take them really quickly at night time. So those, what else do I take? Some zinc, magnesium, calcium, and some extra zinc on top of that. That's what I take at the moment. And cool. Intermittently do fish oils.
Yeah.
But that's probably more. Yeah, omega-3s. And vitamin D every now and again. I never used to really take it because obviously the previous job I was outside all the time. But now I'm more, a little bit more programming in the office for a bit longer. So I probably do need to introduce that now. Yeah. That would be it. I don't, if you actually looked across the spectrum of all the supplements that you have available, there's not really much else that would give you, caffeine obviously is in there, different forms.
Oh, yeah. You have to have caffeine. That's essential.
I mean, it's just, I wouldn't be alive without it.
No, exactly.
But is there much evidence for much of the other stuff? Not really.
No. Yeah.
So that's sort of the essentials for me would be that. But again, the creatine's a weird one though. The amount of strength athletes, power athletes you speak to, do you take creatine? Nah. So they sort of say like, I probably should, but obviously I can't be bothered to buy it. Well,
it's like one of the cheapest supplements you can get in terms of the
one of the most
gains that you can get. Yeah.
One of the most researched sports supplements that's ever in all time, ever. Proven time and time again to improve strength and power sports, especially. So I can't see why you wouldn't take it. The only reason you wouldn't is if you literally had like a steak every night for dinner.
Yeah, you're somehow getting it through your diet.
Yeah.
But, okay, the last question I want people to be able to come away with maybe like a bit of a working structure for their strength training if it's possible. I feel like we've already touched on lots of sets and reps and stuff. So maybe if we could consolidate it. If someone was listening right now and they wanted to get stronger, improve their, let's say, squat, bench, and dead, because that makes it easy.
Yeah.
What would be a typical sets, reps, and frequency structure that you would put a person like that on? Let's say they can already do the movement.
Yeah.
They already execute it well. So they're not a complete beginner. But what would be a rough working set, rep, and frequency structure that you would put someone like that on?
Oh, that's a good question. I suppose you have to sort of discount the different things that you would, for the individual, that you take into consideration. It's very, very general.
Yeah, definitely.
You wouldn't go wrong with, again, looking more longer term, because you could say, oh, this is a week's program, but it doesn't necessarily, the week's program doesn't necessarily give you anything. So if you talk like 12 weeks, so you've got 12 weeks to get where you want to get to, or closer to where you want to get to.
Yeah.
I would have 4 training days in the week.
Mm-hmm.
Like maybe do like a Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday off, Thursday, Friday.
Mm-hmm.
I would take, and these are like the broad strokes, so you could actually structure something that made sense. But then take like a high-low approach. High-low being the sort of high intensity work, then low intensity work, and I would class that as high intensity as above 80%, low intensity below 70%, and or lower body, upper body split. So lower body work on the high day, upper body work on the low day, but that's more to do with the motor unit recruitment. So one of two, either high percentage on multiple lifts disciplines and then low percentage, or lower upper, and then day off, repeat.
Yep.
So that would be
the difference there for rep ranges. Would that be like kind of 3 to 5 versus like 6 to 8?
Well, no, probably like 2 to 1 to 3, 1 to 3 on the high day.
Yeah, nice.
As in, you are working high percent. You're going high, so you said you're going to go high. Go high. Don't sort of meet yourself. Get in the middle somewhere. So go high, low volume, high intensity. Next day, lower volume, below 70%, and then work on some other things. And that could be, with that model there, that kind of high-low model, your high percentage really focused on the core disciplines that you want to get better at, and maybe variations of that, but they're very, very close to the competition lift. And then the next day is accessories, bodybuilding work, really maybe some higher level skill work, which actually can still be very demanding, but you literally can't really do anything above 70% because you've added so many constraints to it. So high level of complexity, then obviously because complexity eats away at intensity, doesn't it? That way, or the other way, which is the sort of lower upper split, which is basically, traditional, which is probably the easier way to describe the sets and rep schemes. Yeah. So your general rule. So you've got your primary lift. So if I was structuring a workout, primary lift, that's the thing you're working on that you want to be best at. The primary lift, squat, bench, or deadlift. You pick that. You probably want to work at above 80%. You probably want to do somewhere like the three sets of 2 repetitions above 80%. And then after that, you pick a special developmental exercise, which is somewhere between 70 and 80%. And that can be 3 sets of 4 to 6, depending on the exercise and the complexity of the exercise. And then after that, you would do more of the work capacity type stuff. So you then take the muscles down more to the isolated. So isolated quads, isolated trunk, and then, 3 sets. I think 3 sets, what's the evidence for 3 sets? It's probably more that it's a nice starting point because most people can recover from 3 sets of also 3, 6, and then the accessories, whatever that is, 9, 12 sets, say. 12 sets total. You got primary lift, competition lift, developmental exercise, work capacity, and then knock it on the head.
Yeah.
And that could be work capacity could be 12 to 15 repetitions. That can actually be quite a high repetition because you're actually looking
could that be like a like a leg extension or
Yeah,
a
leg
leg
extension.
curl,
Yeah,
something
yeah,
like that.
yeah. You
Yeah,
could do. Yeah, there's probably loads of things fit
yeah,
in that continuum. But yeah, if you were
yeah,
to get right down to the isolated exercise, so you want your quads to be strong
yeah,
when you squat. So you probably want them to be relatively well developed in isolation.
hmm yeah,
The leg extension's good. And then some sort of trunk exercise. If you're obviously you want good pillar strength, it doesn't hurt to have good pillar strength, even though you've obviously
hmm
worked on it already in this specific sense. But then you're
yeah,
looking at doing one, you know, and again, this comes back to that frequency thing. Again, if you're doing one hit a week on the squat, you probably definitely want to do some. You definitely want to do some trunk work because
mm,
you're not going to get that repeated stimulus of throughout the week with the higher
yeah.
frequency.
What are some typical trunk work exercises that you do? Is it like a lot of, is it holds, like isometric hold type exercises, or?
I could be anything. Hanging leg
Yeah,
raises are one that I
yeah,
would do more of. I do like dragon flags, leg lowers, whatever they're called, brockies.
yeah, yeah,
Those
yeah,
so that's more of a high level trunk exercise. That wouldn't be 12 to 15. You'd be an absolute animal if you did 12 to 15 of those.
yeah,
Yeah, them regular crunches.
yeah,
You can do holds as well, but I'd look at holds more along the lines of if if you've if you've got some kind of imbalance, then holds are brilliant. I wouldn't
yeah,
necessarily say hold because you're sort of doing static holds anyway. Maybe try
yeah,
and try and integrate some different muscle groups into the through some sort of movement as well if you can. But then
yeah,
that's just again no real evidence for that. It's just preference.
yeah,
Yeah, and then the next day, same kind of format. So competition, developmental, work capacity. Um, for like a bench press day, have a day off, and then repeat similar thing for the deadlift. Which
mm,
obviously, and again, if you were to actually put everything down into like areas and movements, so you've got squat pattern, which is knee flexion, hip flexion exercise. So
yeah,
let's say all our accessory stuff, and we're looking at anterior chain development. Then on the deadlift day, we're looking at posterior chain development. So they're the
yeah,
exercises that you pick to go in each one. On the bench press, you have bench press, but then you probably want like, because you've only got two recovery days until you bench again. You probably want to go more for I'm going to target, you know, pectorals and deltoids as my
yeah,
work capacity accessories. Then on the next day, when you if you do it on the Friday, you've got Saturday, Sunday, Monday. You've got 3 days off, so that might be the day you say, yeah, that's the best day to actually do triceps and actually fatigue them
yeah,
more because I've got a longer rest period until I bench press again.
hmm
Um, but yeah, general rules are again that's a very very generic program, but I think you wouldn't go far wrong with that as a template. And then as progressions, it's just you can use percentage progressions, you can use absolute progressions. I think I really like for a beginner, intermediate beginner, starting strength kind of framework. Mark Rippertoe's starting strength framework is basically add 2.5 kilos
right,
when you go
yeah,
in. So
yeah,
his is more of a 5x5. You know the sort of Bill Starr 5x5 model. So it's like 5x5. Next
hmm
session 5x5. Add 2.5 kilos. Next session 5x5. 2.5 kilos.
yeah.
And then you
And
sort
you
of
just do that until you can't.
basically you do it until you can't. Yeah, but for a
Yeah,
beginner,
yeah,
you can't really. That's such a starting strength is a book that pretty much every single S&C coach and strength sort of anyone who's interested in strength should read that book and practical programming as well by him.
starting strength and practical
Yeah,
programming.
because
Got it.
it's again probably more social. It's made more complicated now
Yeah,
than it ever has been, and they're
yeah,
two books that literally go. You can get really really strong in a very very simple way.
hmm
Small progressions over time, basic barbell exercises, nothing fancy, basic barbell exercises with the smallest progression you can make to call it progressive overload. And you basically
yeah,
do that till it stops.
yeah.
Then you find
And
then you look at other
the
things.
element about that is that people can be so impatient, right? Like,
Well,
no, I want to put a 10 on each side this
yeah,
week.
yeah. Well, I don't
Yeah,
think,
yeah, yeah,
again, it's biological stress, isn't it? So if you understand
yeah,
like biological stress, you've done more. Your body can't necessarily perceive some of it, but you can only produce as much force you can produce. So put the
mm,
least amount on to call it a progression.
yeah,
And then just keep doing that. And you do that
yeah,
enough time. You do that enough times, you'll be, in terms of being strong compared to the average person, you'll be incredibly strong compared to the average person, because
yeah,
the one thing you have done is you have consistently applied stress week after week after week after week after week, without these big interruptions where you go, I've I'm injured, or I'm
Yeah.
overtrained. You won't get overtrained with that, because you complete 5 by 5. That means you haven't failed, and then you put 2.5 on. You should have gone through a recovery cycle, more than enough of a recovery cycle to do that again and again and
Mhm.
again, and you'll be much
And
stronger than a normal person.
a component to that, say something like a 5 by 5, or even like the model that you were talking about, people shouldn't be working to complete failure in these sets, right? Like that fifth set of 5, what should that fifth rep be like? Should it be complete failure, or should it be, say, if we use like reps in reserve, you still have a few more reps in reserve?
It really depends, because if you are a
Mm-hmm.
beginner, you could have technical failure. You could
Yep.
be metabolically be fatigued. If
Yep.
you don't judge your rest periods properly, you could
Yeah.
fail for so many different reasons. But
Yeah.
yeah,
True.
I think ideally you wouldn't necessarily fail, because one
Yeah.
thing you do want to do is practice this kind of like good form as a beginner
Mm-hmm.
novice. You want to practice good form. You want every rep to look really good.
Mm-hmm.
You don't want to look like every single rep looks completely different to the last. So not as a beginner. You want
Yeah.
it to look as good as it can, and not necessarily fail. Because again, going back to what did you start with? You started with nothing. You weren't doing any
Mm.
squats. You weren't doing any training, or you were, but you were doing like, I don't know,
Like a bro
three,
split or something.
3 by 12.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Yeah.
completely
Yeah.
different, a
Exactly.
completely different world.
Yeah.
Three
Yeah.
by
Yeah.
12. Yeah. But yeah, then you're up in the naturally the intensity will go up because the rep range is lower, recruiting
Mm-hmm.
more high threshold motor units because it's high for you. Not necessarily high your genetic potential, nowhere near, but it's high for you right now. So you are recruiting what you need to recruit. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so you could fail. I wouldn't say it's a prerequisite not to avoid failure completely. I think it could happen, but I think it's the consistency is what's key
Mm.
with all training. That's actually probably the underpinning thing with what I believe in terms of becoming an elite athlete. So starting from the very beginning
Consistency.
is consistency. You want to apply
Yeah.
a consistent stimulus over and over and
Mm-hmm.
over again. Recover, stimulus, recover, stimulus, recover, stimulus, and not
Yeah.
have these kind of interruptions in training that lead you to stop doing the thing that's going to get you where you want to get to. Do as much
Yeah.
of the thing that you can recover from that gets you where you need to get to, and
Yeah.
just be
And that's
consistent.
across so many sports. Like I chatted to the Ultraman world champ last week about like cardiovascular stuff like running and like
Yeah,
how to improve at running. And that was his advice too. He was like, whatever you can do consistently is the best thing.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah. If you can keep
yeah,
turning up, that's the best thing than doing your PB squat and then what you're taken out for 2 weeks because
yeah,
injured your hip or something
yeah,
like that because you
yeah.
went too heavy.
Well, the only time you really go for it is in competition. That's when you really
Yeah.
start to, if you need to push the
Mm-hmm.
boundaries. But you
Mm.
likely won't need to do it as often if you're really consistent with the training, because you will just gradually get yourself there. And that's why I think people can't really get their heads around this kind of like this. It's probably 10 years of that.
Yeah.
And it's not
Yeah.
for, and the thing's absolutely fine. It's not necessarily for everyone. Not everyone's wired the same way where they're like, I'm happy doing the same thing over and over and over again to
Mm-hmm.
achieve the thing that I set out to achieve 10 years ago.
Yeah.
But that's absolutely fine. You'll
Mm.
get more enjoyment out of variability, and you won't get enjoyment out of it. Like, it's like,
Yeah.
you won't enjoy it. If
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
enjoy
Yeah.
it, you're made for like the sort of higher end sports, especially individual sports.
Yeah. Because that's what it takes, right? Is the long term view
Yeah.
and the micro improvements
But you
over a
won't
long
find
period of time.
you will not find any one of them, any one of those people who turn around and say, I hate it. They
Yeah.
love it.
Yeah.
They might get every now and again be a bit like, oh God, same old, but deep down they absolutely love the process, and it's almost like a security blanket to a degree, I guess. It's like you know
Yeah.
exactly what's going on.
Yeah, and it's like a consistent pillar in your life too.
Mm,
That's what I think about like a fitness pursuit of any kind. If
yeah,
you're turning up consistently, it's like you have this consistent pillar in your life that
yeah,
no matter what's going on to a certain extent, you're going to get this thing done and
yeah,
you're working towards this meaningful goal.
yes, yeah. I think working
Mm,
towards a goal is really important. Like
mm,
you just can't beat it, and whether you achieve it or not, it's just you got to love the process, haven't you?
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
even if you fail at it, it's like, we'll go back and review it and start again. Not start again, sorry, but is review it and then refine it, and that's that process which never ends. There's no end point to that. Just you go until you break.
Yeah, it keeps on going.
Age will get you in the end.
Yeah, it'll catch up to you.
Yeah.
Oh, well, anyway, Rob, I reckon that brings us to the end of our strength episode. That was really enjoyable for me, man, like getting to pick your brain about strength and go deeper into these ideas that we touched on in our first episode.
Some really good questions as well. Had to really think about a few of them.
Yeah, thanks, man. I'm just taking this approach with a podcast now where it's like, what do I want to know? You know, what do I personally want to know?
Well, I think that has to be, well, that just leads to a better conversation, doesn't it?
Yeah, exactly. Case in point, right?
Well, I don't know. You tell me. Yeah. I enjoyed it.
Yeah. It must have been good.
Yeah.
Same again as our last episode. If people want to find you, where's the best place for people to find you and check out your stuff?
So Instagram at 9for9 strength is my Instagram handle. Yeah, and then just have a look and see if you like the stuff.
And your Instagram is growing, man. Like I chatted to you before we started. I think it's gone up like 300 or 400 followers since our last episode.
Yeah, I suppose it has.
Yeah, man. It's going up a lot. And you only started it in it was like July or August or something last year.
August the 2nd, I think, is when I joined Instagram. Whole new world.
Man. Yeah.
Wasn't prepared for it.
Yeah, you're gonna leave soon.
Yeah. I'll go back to Twitter and just hover in the background.
Yeah. All right, thanks heaps, man. I'm looking forward to our next episode too. We still have to tee it in, but it'll all be about athletic performance. I don't know how we'll frame it, but something along those lines, sports performance.
Cool. Well, I suppose there's some stuff I'd love to talk more about some of the rugby specific stuff. If there's an avenue.
Definitely. That would be our next episode. It'll be primarily focused on rugby stuff.
Cool.
Good. Anyway, I'll stop our recording.